Hello again, folks. Just back from the Pilanesberg, per kind favor of some wonderful friends with whom we spent the last 5 days. And so we again have had the opportunity to escape from Johannesburg and be in a very beautiful place and able to see some wonderful wildlife and to enjoy being together. I realize how very fortunate we are and how wonderful these opportunities are, and how good it is to be at a stage of life where we're able to go away and see new things and find new ways to delight in life and be reminded of how wonderful it is to be alive and to be surrounded by so much goodness and beauty. Anyway, today, Exodus chapter 20, verses 1 to 3. Then God spoke all these words: I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. This is the first of the 10 Commandments. I'm sure we know that well, and it is the central tenet of the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. It forbids worship of any other gods. The only God to be worshipped is Yahweh, the one true God. Worship of any other god constitutes idolatry, and often idolatry in Old Testament days was punishable by death in various contexts around the world. The Bible tells us that the commandments were given to the Israelites initially by God through Moses, after the Israelites had emerged from slavery in Egypt. The Old Testament records the numerous occasions when the Israelites, influenced by the people and the tribes around them, repeatedly engaged in idolatry and thus invoked God's anger and brought punishment upon themselves. The exile in Babylon was a very severe punishment for their idolatry and seems to have been a major turning point, leading the Jewish people to decide to have and to worship only one God, the one true God, Yahweh, exclusively. But the Jewish prayer, Shema, with its accompanying blessings and curses, makes it clear that love for God is part of the deal. So it's not just exclusive worship and obedience. It's more than that, it's deeper than that. And it is meant to include love for God. The Bible urges those who believe in the one true God and in Jesus Christ, the Messiah, in the New Testament, to abstain from idolatry. Idolatry might consist of seeking spiritual intervention and guidance from sources other than this one true God, the Father of the Lord Jesus Christ, as well as making idols of earthly things like food and physical pleasure and work and money, etc. Those all constitute idols because they threaten to steer our worship and our devotion away from this one true God and divert us from our life's true purpose. But the problem is that we might worship who we imagine the one true God to be, rather than who God actually is. And if we do this, we're guilty of making an idol out of God, a false idol. We worship a God that perhaps we are entirely comfortable with, a God who fits neatly into our lives and into our circumstances. We might end up worshipping a God who is made in our image and worshipping a God who doesn't, in fact, exist. It is true that Jesus shows us who the real, true God is. Jesus mirrors God, and we are told that Jesus is the exact representation of God's being. Jesus shows us the qualities that God possesses. Jesus reveals to us God's true nature. Jesus represents truth, all that is true about the God that we worship. But Jesus too becomes tamed in our minds and tamed in our churches, so that he is not experienced as someone who threatens our comfort and our whole way of life at all. He is not a God who disturbs us and who challenges us and who keeps us on our toes. And of course, the God who is the true God should be a God who keeps us on our toes, a God who keeps us guessing. God is mystery. In many ways, he is incomprehensible. He is beyond our wildest thoughts and imaginings. From the Westminster Shorter Catechism of 1946-1947, God is a spirit, infinite, eternal, and unchangeable in his being, wisdom, power, holiness, justice, goodness, and truth. Just hearing those words, God is a spirit, already makes God sound foreign. We don't understand what it is to be spirit alone, a spirit devoid from a physical form. We can't imagine ourselves being reduced to spirit with no physical form or substance, let alone God. And yet this is supposedly what we believe. God is a spirit, infinite, eternal, and unchangeable in his being, wisdom, power, holiness, justice, goodness, and truth. The second commandment in Exodus chapter 20 instructs the Israelites to make no idols, whether in the form of something that exists in heaven or in the form of something that exists on earth or in the form of something that exists in the water under the earth. Any physical representation of God would be presumptuous, and it would be an attempt to contain God and to reduce God and to restrict God, and thereby, in a sense, to attempt to control him, to influence him, and to be able then to manipulate him. And so, of course, it makes sense that we should not try to have any sort of physical representation of God, and any representation of God that we might have should be a means to lead us into the divine, and not be seen as something which we devote our attention and our love and our energy to. Who is the God I believe in and worship? It's worth asking that question. Who is the God that I believe in and worship? A dictionary definition reads, definition of God, that is, the creator and ruler of the universe, and source of all moral authority, the supreme being, perfect in power, wisdom, and goodness. God is seen as being omnipotent, all-powerful, omniscient, all-knowing, omnipresent, present everywhere, all the time, transcendent, reigning above, all in creation, and infinite, and so on. If we reduce God to the one who saves us from trouble, who intervenes on our behalf, who heals us from sickness and disease, who offers us resurrection and new life, if we do that, have we created an idol out of God? Something that is useful for our own purposes? Is it too easy to define God in that way? Perhaps it is even wrong to reduce God to that kind of status, if it's possible to reduce God at all. Sometimes we know we have to endure troubles and hardships and sickness and disease, and there's no way of escaping it. And we're conscious of a kind of unease when we talk about God being a supreme being who rules over the universe, because a ruler exercises government or dominion. A ruler surely calls the shots, determines what is going to be, how things are going to work out. But as far as we know, God doesn't intervene in human affairs. Certainly, he doesn't do that regularly and insistently. He doesn't intervene in human affairs to establish his reign. His kingdom is different. It is other. It is not a worldly kingdom. We do not see around us a world surrendered to God's authority and God's control. If God is all-powerful and all-knowing and present everywhere at the same time and infinitely loving, why is it that we see so much evil, so many wars, so many natural disasters, demonstrations of inhumanity and injustice and perversion and persecution and violence and inequities and poverty and so on? Simple definitions of God simply don't work. Jill and I are doing a Lent course consisting of different perspectives on who God is and who God is not, and what we mean by God, and critiques of traditional ideas about God and God's existence. And it is extremely stimulating and thought-provoking and mind-blowing. it's worth asking ourselves some questions about what we believe, who we believe God to be. God is a combination of so many opposites and contradictions. God is powerful, but he is vulnerable. He is transcendent, but he is immanent, permanently pervading the universe with his presence. God shows himself in weakness and in humility. God is gentle and gracious and compassionate. I find it difficult these days to imagine God as disposer supreme, the one who organizes, who arranges things, and generally calls the shots. It seems to me that God is different from and more than that. We have to go deeper. Paul Tillich references God as the ground of our being, which sounds much more appealing than disposer supreme. But we haven't got there yet in our Lenten journey, discussing Paul Tillich and what he believed. And in any case, I cannot pretend to be any kind of expert on what any of these philosophers and thinkers thought and said about God. Simone Weil says, I must move towards an abiding conception of the divine mercy, a conception which does not change whatever event destiny may send upon me, and which can be communicated to no matter what human being, and what can be communicated to by no matter what human being. Okay, we need to think about that a bit. But the idea of perhaps God being the divine mercy is another kind of phrase or description or expression that I find quite appealing. As I say, I'm no expert on any of this, but I think it's worth considering who we believe God to be, because it is so easy to reduce God, except, as I've said, that's impossible to do. And what we end up with is not God at all. It is so easy to make an idol of God and worship the idol rather than to try to find out who this God is that we believe in. God, I am sure, is not a God who satisfies our every need, and not a God who gives us what we desire. And that's not the point of all this, to believe in a God that can be counted on to just come onto the stage of our lives and fill in the gaps and make it all easy and suspend all the difficulties and troubles and suffering. It clearly just doesn't work that way. And we need to be more concerned to be caught up in the divine cycle of love, the love that flows within the community of the Trinity from a Christian perspective. This might all seem too much for our brains. Some of it is a bit too much for mine. But the idea of a God who gets angry, a God who judges and punishes, a God who determines every moment whether we live or whether we die, that doesn't wash with me these days. What we do know whoever we believe God to be, is that we are called to be people who love sincerely, people who care deeply about justice, people who are humble and generous and compassionate and kind, and so on. We can make God known by reflecting these qualities. And whilst we seek to be true to the God who calls us to humble service, we should be excited about growing deeper into the mystery of God's life within us, a continuous stream that flows through us, uniting us, energizing us, liberating us to become all we have the potential to be. And I think, though this blows our minds, I think that this is an exciting journey to be on, a journey of growing insight into who God is, and hopefully becoming more and more who God intends that we should be. Tapping into this huge energy, this huge life force, allowing our spirits to come alive to the Spirit who is in us and is in the universe around us, in the world, a wonderful, dynamic, personal, powerful, spiritual force or energy. And I don't want to reduce God to a force or an energy, but something that is at the ground of our being, at the center of our existence, the thing which enables us to live and move and have our being and grow and change and blossom and flourish and become who we are. And that's enough for today. I hope that this is helpful, and I hope that you'll be encouraged to consider all of this stuff. Who is God for you? And what have you believed traditionally in the past about God? And does it work? Does it make sense? And are you being called to try to consider anew who this God really is? Amen. And God bless you. See you next week.